At last, Tharbad. Boromir sat in his saddle outside the south gates, looking up through the mist at the two crumbling flanking towers. The gates themselves were long gone. Whether they had been oak doors or steel gates, they had long since been salvaged. It seemed that at one time ramparts had linked the two flanking towers of the gatehouse, but they had either collapsed or had been purposefully dismantled and salvaged. Now, the towers, their walls thick with ivy, welcomed all comers. He looked either way along the ghost of the ancient city walls. The battlements were jagged, like a torn parchment. Over the centuries, the people of Enedwaith had taken much of the masonry to build their hamlets and villages. It seemed to him almost like looting a dead body. Most of those hamlets and villages now stood deserted. He had been told that Tharbad had once been a great city, but compared to Pelargir or Dol Amroth, it appeared more like a provincial town. Yet even now, Tharbad was trying to cling to the land, to assert its hold. The last few leagues had been flat and featureless, and the horizon seemed ever close. The sheep had grown in number, and the odd small barn broke the monotony. The north road had turned from a muddy track, in some parts little more than a long, narrow bog, to firm, turf-covered stone. More sheep greeted him as he rode through the gates into what was once a wide, semicircular square. Now only the stubs of thick walls marked out what once must have been tall, grand buildings. A wide street led north from the square. It fell gently as he rode, and soon the turf blanketing the paving became sodden and then muddy. Boromir reined in Lostal as he saw the flooding ahead. The ruins to either side of the street were inundated. The city looked as though it had been washed up on the shore in a storm. A mallard and her ducklings paddled across the street, hurrying as they noticed him. Boromir walked Lostal forward, and she splashed into the dark green water. Soon she was knee-deep, and now the water was splashing about under the stirrups. She snorted and raised her head, and Boromir stroked her neck and tried to soothe her. At times the street level rose and the water receded, but then it would dip down even further as they drew closer to the river. Here, very few of the truncated, ruined walls were visible above the flooding. Boromir drew his sword and dipped it in the water, trying to gauge the position of any walls. But Lostal was clever enough to take her time with her footing, and he felt no need to urge her on. Soon, the remaining walls were tall enough to mark out the streets again. Ahead stood the only surviving tower of the Bridge of Tharbad. It marked the position of the ford that had developed since the city was flooded. Whether by nature or by design, the bridge's masonry had crumbled into the waters of the mighty river Gwathlo, forming a submerged causeway. The street began to rise, and soon Lostal was splashing through fetlock-deep water. She halted in the midst of what must have once been a large concourse that surrounded the approach to the bridge. Boromir gazed upstream at the swollen river. The ruined watchtowers of the walls stood faintly in the mist. Stone piers marked what must have been an embankment, and indeed off to the north a stone wall rose from the water, marking the north bank of the river.
"It may as well be a chasm in the earth,"
said Finduilas. Since the fords of Eisen, Lostal had easily forded the gurgling streams of Enedwaith, and dilapidated stone bridges or slippery half-rotten logs had spanned the wider watercourses he'd crossed. But this was something different. He watched an old branch, draped in filthy weed and grass, floating towards the submerged bridge. It moved swiftly as the unfathomable power of the river pushed it onward. It surged over the ford, then spun and bobbed in the water.
"The current is stronger over the stones."
Boromir massaged his temples and reached inside his tunic for the phial. He knocked back the last of the tincture.
"Faramir would have been in Rivendell by now."
"What do you know of Faramir?"
He sighed.
"I know he would have the courage to cross this river."
"Mother, I have had enough. Please be still for pity's sake."
Why did you not read the letter?
It was not for my eyes. Lord Elrond is...
Is that all you are, Boromir? A puppet for your father? A mere messenger boy? Will you spend the rest of your life following his every order without question?
Enough!
He glanced about him, then nudged Lostal, and she walked cautiously towards the ford. The ground felt level and stable, but the horse hesitated as she felt the stones change again underfoot. The water babbled around her knees. They followed half-rotten wooden posts towards the surviving tower to the right of the bridge, where a slipway ran parallel to the submerged quayside. They descended gently until the water was splashing around Boromir's boots. A turn to the right brought them onto the ford. Lostal faltered as she felt the uneven stones of the ruined bridge.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Boromir twisted around towards the voice. Of course, it had to be the elf. Tauriel was sitting in her saddle at the top of the slipway.
How does she manage to sneak up on you like that?
What else would you suggest?
As I tried to tell you before, the ford at the best of times is tricky. And it looks like the recent rain has swollen the river.
She was starting to sound like his mother.
She doesn't seem to have an answer to your question,
said Finduilas. Boromir smiled and turned back towards the river. He clicked his tongue, and Lostal stepped tentatively forward, feeling for a sure footing.
I would turn back, Lord Boromir.
He twisted round and stared at the elf as Lostal paused again.
How do you know my name?
The way ahead is full of danger. I can show you a safer route across the river, to the north.
Where exactly might this crossing be?
Another ford, to the north.
Never trust an elf,
said Finduilas.
I thank you for your concern,
he said. He bowed his head a little before turning Lostal and walking her forward.
I'm afraid I must insist, Lord Boromir.
Who does she think she is, this spy?
Again, Boromir turned towards Tauriel.
I'm beginning to lose.
Tauriel had her bow leveled at him. Boromir wasn't sure at the time what made him turn away from an elf of the woodland realm with an arrow nocked and aimed at him. He would later maintain that it was the trust he had in his shield, but she could have easily shot at his exposed neck. Lostal stepped forward and Boromir peered through the rushing water at the more level and even stones of the fallen bridge. He heard the elf's horse splashing down the slipway, and then her arrow whipped past his ear.
Leave me be, elf.
Do not go to Bree,
Boromir called to her over his shoulder.
Unless you can aid me in fording this river, I would kindly ask you to go back to your forest.
The elf's horse snorted as he splashed and churned the water behind him.
Follow me no more.
The surge of the water pushed against Lostal's flank and rump. As she negotiated the now uneven stones, the other horse drew alongside. The elf reached forward and grabbed Boromir's reins before turning both horses back towards the bank. Her livid hazel eyes flashed with determination. Boromir grabbed her arm and pulled at his reins. Lostal neighed in confusion as they fought for her control. Boromir swung his arm at the elf's chest, meaning to unsteady her. Instead, she dropped backwards in her saddle, avoiding the blow completely, then swung a punch at his head. Boromir threw his head back, barely avoiding the blow, before returning a punch to the elf's flank. Tauriel snatched back Boromir's reins. The horses jostled in the churning water, struggling to keep their footing. Boromir drew his knife, but the elf knocked it from his hand as soon as it was unsheathed. He grabbed her wrist and pulled as Lostal turned. She swiped her other arm across and up into his forearm, and his grip weakened. Now they were facing the quayside, and the elf's horse was dancing on the edge of the bridge deck. Again, Boromir reached out, grabbed at the reins. He jabbed at her face, but she was far too quick. Seeing no other way to stop her, he desperately hooked his fingers under the crook of her knee and yanked upwards with all his strength. Her boot came free of her stirrup, but she resisted, kicking and twisting against his grasp. He let his reins go and twisted round in his saddle, grabbing her ankle as she brought her knee up. Pressing down, almost standing in his stirrups, he pulled her foot up and her knee towards him. The elf was forced to twist towards him, and she swung her arm down to try to free herself, but it was too late. Boromir pushed her leg up and over her saddle. Her eyes widened as she released his reins and flopped into the water, holding tight her own reins. Her horse followed her into the water as she was swept away. He was shocked at how strong the flow of the river was. The current pulled her under for a moment before she resurfaced and swam after her horse. Boromir fumbled for his reins as Lostal splashed, neighed and snorted, trying to keep her balance. As she moved back, Boromir felt her right hind limb drop. She staggered desperately, but Boromir felt himself falling. As they both plunged into the river, he let the reins go. The water was about his head, and a wave of panic washed over him as he fought every instinct to draw breath. His eyes were closed, and he had no idea which way was up. But then the muted noise of the water flashed off and on as his head bobbed up and down. As he resurfaced, he sucked in cool air, spluttering as he tried to keep his head above the wave. He opened his eyes, staring at the sky like a rabid dog. The few moments he had been submerged felt like hours. He looked around for Lostal. She was righting herself, but as she swam towards him, he saw the bloodshot ring of white surrounding her black eyes. He felt for the reins as she neared and looked back upriver. The bridge tower already seemed a mile away. Boromir grabbed the pommel of his saddle, and Lostal started to swim towards the south bank, but the current held them midstream. He looked downstream and saw Tauriel's horse swimming towards the south bank. There was no sign of Tauriel. As he turned back towards the quayside, something plunged into the water next to his shoulder. He looked back towards the north bank.